Watch this one. Death, adoption, addiction, reconnecting with your high school girlfriend 26 years later, and doing right business. That's what you're going to hear on the podcast today. This guy is full of energy. I'm so excited to be able to share with you a buddy of mine. I haven't even got the chance to meet him in person, but I already feel like he's my brother. He has been so gracious with me. We've tried to schedule the podcast a couple of times. He's been at meetings. I've been dealing with car challenges, and he's the baddest used car negotiator that you could ever imagine. So please help me to be able to welcome Paul McCarthy. You guys are going to absolutely love him. Let's get this party started.
Nothing more on my mind. I got two shines, so every day I climb. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never know, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
The real question is North Texas barbecue, Central Texas barbecue. Where are we at, Paul?
Well, you're trying to give a shout out to Scott Schmidt because I will tell Scott all day long it's North Texas barbecue. It's better than Central Texas. Central Texas has the old ones. North Texas, we're just refined and making it better.
So you're a better version. North, like the more you go north, the more refined and better it becomes.
Exactly. And it's only in Fort Worth. I'm not going to talk about that Dallas side.
Well, help me with this too. Like, how can we connect death, adoption, addiction, 26 years of being away from somebody, and then reconnecting, and then having the grace and forgiveness that you do? Because if you take those first four, that's going to make an angry person, but you are one of the most joyous people, and you're doing right business all the time.
Yeah. So I always tell people, Kelly, in order to know me, you have to know my story. And it's full of loss and it's full of addiction. It's full of not some great things. But it started when I was 14. So I was adopted single. My mom adopted me, and when the caseworker come by, she was already divorced from her husband. But she'd have my brothers and sisters, so I was a baby of seven. She'd have them draw little refrigerator cartoon drawings and always put Mr. McCarthy in there. And so the caseworker go, "Oh, where's Mr. McCarthy? Oh, he's on business." 1971. Nobody checked. So she pulled that coup off. And growing up without a dad, I had two brothers, but one of my brothers, Brian, was always my hero. He was the one I looked up to, and just he was my world. And so I'll never forget. Actually, today's tomorrow. Uh, it will be 1985. It'll be what is that? 40 years
Yeah.
is when he wrecked, which to me is a God thing that I'm sitting here talking about it. So he wrecked on May 2nd, 1985, in a motorcycle wreck, and went into ICU. They had him in a coma. We got our family down, pulled the plug. He passed away on May 4th, and I went to his funeral, and I was given the burden of on myself of I'm the man now. I have to be the man. Don't cry. And so I didn't cry. When he was in the hospital, in order so people wouldn't see me cry, I'd go to the chapel and I'd cry. It was my safe space. So that day I left the Catholic Church following a casket, and I didn't step foot back in the Catholic Church for 13 years. But along the way, God was always walking beside me. He had Jesus right there with me. And I talk about my faith. I'm open about my faith. It's carried me through life. And I believe that if I can share my story and change one person's life, my job's done. But I want to share my story and share, change many people's lives.
So
So
were
after
you
Brian,
Brian or were you Paul? Were you 14 or was Brian 14 when this happened?
I was 14, Brian was 21.
Mm,
So he was in college at Texas Christian University.
mhm.
And so I'll kind of jump around because you have to excuse. I got squirrel syndrome, which ADHD. My wife says that if she asked me the time, I build a clock. But with Brian, I wanted to know why. I could never figure out the why. And so throughout my life, God showed me the why, but I never saw it. And so, for example, I'll start off. My mom passed away in 1997.
Okay.
The day she passed away on October 12th. We buried her on October 17th. That day, I left her funeral crying. My nephew and I, who's actually 2 months older than me, we went to have a drink. We were sitting there having a drink, and I got a phone call, and it said, "Congratulations, you're a dad." So God took one and He gave one.
Got it.
And so I lived recklessly. I lived like I had a death wish because I didn't have my why. I didn't have my why. Uh, Jake, who was my first son, I wrote a post about him recently, and
Yeah.
that's kind of how you and I got connected.
Mhm.
I'm not afraid to tell the story. I'm not ashamed to tell the story, but he's on the run from the law now. And the last conversation I had with him, I tried to get him in Christian rehab. He said, "Dad, I can't get sober. It's not me." And he's looking at some time if he ever gets caught. And I told him that day, I said, "I'm afraid the next time I see you, Jake, it's going to be in a coffin."
Mm.
And that was tough to say to your son. But I'll give you a little sunlight on that because he was born the day I buried my mom. I always called him Grandma Sue's little angel.
Uh-huh.
So he and I were sitting at his apartment talking in the car. And, he's my mini me, and it drives him crazy. He walks, talks, and acts just like me. And so we're talking back and forth, and a cardinal landed on my hood. And I said, "Jake, you see that?" He goes, "The cardinal?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, I see it." I said, "Do you know what it means?" He goes, "No." I said, "Google it." Well, for those that don't know, cardinal means somebody from heaven is watching out for you. And he turned white as a ghost, and he got a tear in his eye. And that was the last time I talked to him, and that's almost been 5 years now.
Wow.
And so that was a struggle. Um, Another thing that God walked beside me on is I was part of a founder of a nonprofit for veterans. My best friend did 6 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he was injured in a night training mission jump, and he's a C4 quadriplegic and can only move from his head up or neck up. So we started a nonprofit for him, helped wounded veterans and their families. But the special part, this was in 2013, we donated to a place in Fort Worth. It's a nonprofit, and they help grieving children handle the loss of a loved one. So this is 28 years after Brian had died. And so I'm sitting there, and they said, "Okay, Paul, you're going to deal with the 14-year-olds." That wasn't lost on me at all. I knew what God was saying, but what happened next brought me full circle and gave me my why. Is we were going through spiritual training, and growing up Catholic, priests, they're around. I went to a Catholic school with nuns, and so the priest would come in and say mass. But this priest sat next to me, and I knew him from somewhere. So I looked at him, and he mentioned Texas Christian University.
Mm.
So I walked up to him at our break, and I said, "Father Charlie, I know you." He goes, "How?" I said, "You gave my brother his last rites in 1985. He goes, "What was your brother's name?" I said, "Brian." He goes, "He died in a motorcycle wreck right in front of the fraternity houses. He was the first student I ever had to give last rites to." So here I am 27 years later, helping kids who are 14 years old deal with grief and understand how to handle grief when that 14-year-old boy in me never came out, but he came out that day, and all my whys were answered.
What's it with you in 26 or 27 years, man? Because the same thing happened. You had a high school sweetheart, you fumbled the bag, and then, or you're saying that she fumbled the bag. And then
Well,
26 years later, you guys come together over something that is wild. When you told me this
yeah,
part of it, but what's it with you with 27 years, man? Does it take that long to ruminate for you?
I guess it's kind of like it's like the Bible of 40 years or 40 days. I mean, that's my number. So,
So, I
you
mean,
know,
is there gonna be things about our friendship that it takes 27? I don't know that I'm that patient there, Paul. I want things
uh,
to happen maybe in our relationship it can happen in 23.
well, why don't we do days?
Okay,
We can just
that
do
would
it in days.
be so much better. Tell me about you. You said that she fumbled the bag, and then she finally realized after a time. But 26 years after you have a high school sweetheart, and then you guys reconnect, and now you're married. You've been married for a year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Who
Thank you.
really fumbled the bag?
So, well, I was her safe space, and we dated a little bit, but she she just never she I was her safe space. We did our first communion together in 1979. So we grew up in the same neighborhood. We were what I call the original Brat Pack. There was four of us,
So she was
and
your Winnie
so
Cooper? Was she your Winnie Cooper and
yeah,
you were Kevin Arnold?
exactly.
So
Yes,
were you Paul or were you Kevin Arnold?
I was actually Paul. No, I was Kevin Arnold. What do you think? I was a stud.
But Kevin Arnold, if
Look,
you watch that show, Kevin Arnold, he would do some things like Winnie would be right there and it would be like all teed up. I used to get so mad at the Wonder Years because we all wanted them to be together. And then he would
oh yeah,
make a silly decision. Did you make those decisions too, Paul?
I might have a little bit. I you know, I, let's just skip forward to how we reunited now, because she's gonna watch us and she's gonna come home tonight and go, okay.
Yeah, there we go.
So, so I will say this: she is my boss. I'm putting that out there on the record. And any of you men that say your wife isn't, you're lying. So, I said I was adopted, and in 2015, God blessed me with a journey to find my birth parents. And what my birth dad, who I really wanted to connect with because I grew up without a dad, he was my main one. He had passed away in '98 from a massive heart attack. Growing up adopted, going to the doctor, I call myself the NA kid because whenever they'd ask my history, I put NA. And so I found out he had a massive stroke and heart attack, died. So I was on a stress test the next day. Luckily, my heart's good. It's pumping and beating, so I'm all good. But I found out that God has a sense of humor because being the baby of seven, both my brothers had already passed. So I was the baby of four at that time. Well, in 2015, I became the baby of seven again. But this time I have six sisters. Yeah.
Hold
So
on. That's some you just threw us for you just threw us for a loop there. So did your mom marry Greg Brady or Mr. Brady or what? What happened?
no, my four sisters I grew up with, and then my two biological half birth sisters.
You found them.
Yes,
Yes. Oh
yes.
my gosh. Do
So
you guys connect right off the bat, or is it a uneasy kind of "you're my brother," or does it? Because I have never experienced this, or is it like in the movies where you meet them and then there's music in the background, there's a collage of scenes of you guys connecting and being like, oh, that reminds me of you, or was it awkward because you're an adult and then you meet these two other adults? How was it?
it was like a part of me. I truly had become whole, and I still remember my dad loved gambling, and he might have passed that on to me. So we met in Vegas for our first time. And so we're walking through one of the casinos, and I'm walking with my son, and I have three nephews. And at the time, they were much younger. So we were all holding hands. And I turn around, and Michelle, one of my sisters, is crying. I said, "Why are you crying?" She goes, "You walk, talk, and act just like dad."
Wow.
And that was a wow moment for me, because I always tell people I looked in the mirror going, "Where'd I get my ears from?" While you're looking in the mirror going, "Man, I'm starting to look like Pops." I never knew. So
Oh my
so
gosh.
that was a true blessing for me. And through that, see, I told you I can build you a clock. My life story is a clock.
I mean,
And
this is fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating to be able to see the twists, the turns, right? And then to see the joy. Like the because a
yeah,
lot of times what kept you from being negative about it, because a lot of people would say, I don't, I was adopted. I don't know my birth parents. I've gone through a loss of this. I've gone through a loss of that. What kept you with this joy? And you seem to be present wherever you're at. How were you
yeah.
able to do that through all of it?
So I always tell people I had two moms. I had one that loved me enough to carry me, and the one that made me the man I am today. And the mom that made me the man I am today, she gave me a strong foundation in religion. And as much as I didn't think I was listening, I was. And it's always kind of propelled me. I was one of those guys that said I didn't need to have a church relationship with God because I have a relationship. But throughout my life, he has continued to use me as a vessel for other men and other people to lead them to God. And so it's a I tell people it's a blessing for me to be able to change people's lives. And like I said, if my story can help one person, then I'm happy.
Do you think that grow because you grew up in the North Texas, like Dallas area,
Y-
right? Not Fort Worth, like you were saying.
No, 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 no. You have it backwards. I grew up in Fort Worth, not
You did.
Dallas.
Okay.
Yes.
So you being that close in proximity, do you think, I mean, because God has his favor on you, do you think that there is some hindrance in your life because you're so close to the Dallas Cowboys? Do you think that that's going to stop you from getting into heaven, that you are that close to a team that should not be in the NFL?
Well, let me tell you this. I It was pointed out to me on draft day that J-Lo has more rings than the Dallas Cowboys do, which that does not tread lightly with me. That J-Lo has more rings.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
think Ben Affleck's about 15 carats in right now.
Yeah, he sure is. He sure is. Although I tell you, Landman, when I watched it, watching Jerry Jones's monologue almost gave me some bit, like tiniest sliver of understanding a little bit of the organization. And then it was almost like Jesus appeared to me and was like, no, it's the Dallas Cowboys he's talking about. And then I snapped back in and I was completely fine. So I almost got drawn in. Did you grow up a Dallas
Y-
Cowboys fan?
I wore the number 12 on I had the Cowboy jersey for Staubach, and they called me Staubach in the neighborhood because I would wear that around. I either had a soccer ball or a football or a basketball in my hand.
Wow.
And so I still remember there were two neighbors that were probably in it seemed like 60s or 70s, but they were probably in their 50s.
Uh-huh.
But I'd run by, I don't they never knew my name, and we were neighbors for 7 years, and they'd always say, Staubach, go get him.
Take us back to you're in Vegas. You truly believe that gambling is in can be transferred DNA wise, which we'll discuss later. You're with you meet your sisters. You're in Vegas. She cries, but then how does that relate to a 26-year-old high school sweetheart that Kevin Arnold fumbled the bag? Winnie is waiting, and then you end up scoring Winnie. How does that happen?
So I got a call in late 2019, and it was from my Winnie, who every July 26th I thought about her and wondered where she was. We had lost contact. And she said, I need to talk to you. And of course, I was like this 14, 15-year-old boy again, with my stomach spinning with butterflies and my heart fluttering. And she said, you know mom and dad? I said, of course. She goes, you know my brother Michael? He used to take me to school. She goes, I have another brother. I said, say what? And she goes, I have another brother that mom and dad gave up before Michael. And so she goes, I need to know everything you felt coming from outside finding your birth family. And so we started talking, and over time, it was like, you know what? You're still my best friend. And I tell people that the only argument we've had in this almost 6 years we've been together is about me not yielding getting on a highway. And you know life's good when that's the only argument you've ever been in.
What was the situation with the yielding, man? Why weren't you yielding?
Lord, you're gonna bring this up. So there was a car coming on that actually had a yield sign. There's a car on my left side. I'm in the middle lane, so I can't get over. She wanted me to yield to let that car go through. And I tried to explain to her that the triangle means they yield. But I guess in Florida, it's different from Texas. I don't know.
Were you in a truck? They were in a car trying to yield, and so you were looking down on them.
No, I was in our SUV. I mean, it's not a big SUV.
What kind of SUV was it?
It was an Acura
Okay,
MBX.
so it's a mid-size. No, it's a little bit elevated. Was this a smaller car?
You're trying to give her credit. I see where you're going with this.
I mean, was it a smaller car? Because when I see the cars, the cars when they're lowered and they make a lot of noise and they don't move really fast, and
Yeah.
like you have that. A lot of times I won't yield on purpose just because I don't like the way that they're presenting themselves.
N- Okay, so with that point being made, the reason why I didn't yield is because he had a yield sign. I grew up following traffic regulations.
Okay, so you are always a rule follower. You didn't say that early on. You said that you were like you had a death wish. Um,
I said traffic regulations. I did not
only
say rule follower in life.
so
There's
you're a renegade everywhere else, but when you get on the freeway, you are a rule follower.
Okay, next subject, please. I,
Okay, so you guys go through. You finally score Winnie. Great job, man. Don't fumble this bag either. Don't fumble
I'm
this
not.
bag.
I'm not.
I haven't got a chance to meet Winnie, but I can't wait to meet her. And but I know tradition says Kevin Arnold makes some bad decisions. You know what I'm saying? Like Kevin Kevin Arnold was that guy we all wanted to punch in the face sometimes because we were like, "You got Winnie right next door, bro. Like, what are you doing? Take off that Jets jacket and get to courting Winnie."
Yeah, yeah. So it's funny because we went on a vacation a couple months ago, and as you can tell, I like to laugh. I like to have a sense of humor. So she's doing her normal woman thing, shopping, and I'm being the good husband, walking around, acting like I'm looking at stuff. And I found these coasters, and they were the best coasters in the world. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to get her some of these. I'm going to give them to her when we get back. So I got her two of them because I cannot talk to her in the morning until she's had one cup of coffee. She's softening on that rule, but what you see is what you get. This is me without coffee today. So the squirrel syndrome, the ADHD, it's real. And I wake up with my mind like a blender going with no lid on top, coming out with ideas in my mouth. And so I gave her a coaster that said, don't talk to me in the morning until I've had my coffee. And I also gave her another one that said, I didn't know when I got married, you had to buy husband's ears as an extra accessory. So she's an angel. She's truly a saint. And everybody that talks about her, they say she is a saint to put up with you because I'm 90 miles an hour all the time.
When did you fall in love with that part? Because I think a lot of times people try and fix things. You know, they'll be like, "Oh, you're 90 miles an hour. You need to fix that thing." But you have seemed to fall in love with it, and it's become your superpower, not only in your relationships, but also in your business. When did you fall in love with that? And were there people trying to change it early on?
I probably fell in love with it right around the time Marcy and I started dating. She was around me for 2 minutes. My bonus son, James, he has ADHD just as bad as me. And so she grew up with it, with him. And she's around me 2 minutes. She goes, "How long have you been diagnosed with ADHD?" I looked at her like she was crazy. And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You got it." So obviously I do have it. But I learned to embrace what I call embrace the race
Hold on, hold on.
because
I love that. I can't wait for you to get that clip because you said she diagnosed me, so obviously I have it. So I love Winnie. I mean, Winnie. What is your wife's name?
Marcy,
Marcy.
Marcy,
She's gonna get mad because I'm gonna call her Winnie for the rest of her life. When I see her, I'm gonna give her a hug. Be like, Winnie, it's so great to see you. But I want you to review. I want you to review this. Now, I was just about to say you rewind, but in today's life, we don't rewind because we're not using VHS. But if you had VHS, if you rewinded that scene, it is classic because you were just like, she said it, she diagnosed me, so that must be it. That is a
it
good
made
man.
sense.
It's a good
It
man.
made sense though, because I would sit there and I literally wake up and have a million thoughts go through my head before I even get out of bed. And I thought everybody was like that. And
You mean they're
and then
not?
when no, I guess not. The world's telling me different. So so then when I started embracing it and I started looking at things, I when I was with the veteran nonprofit, I had a retired colonel tell me, and it's actually an Aesop quote, but it's change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will change. And so that was in 2017. So I started changing a lot of ways I looked at things. But when she said I have ADHD and not everybody had, ADHD, I was like, okay. So I dove in because rabbit holes are fun things for us with ADHD to dive in. And so I dove in a rabbit hole and started looking at, traits, characteristics, and I posted something on LinkedIn the other day about a Rubik's Cube and comparing my life to it. Is my problem solving? I'm usually 3 steps ahead of other people with problem solving. And that's one of the gifts of ADHD. Now, listening and focusing, that is tough, I'll admit, but I embrace the powerful things.
I think it's wild though because we were just talking and your idea of you don't do traditional networking, which I love. Um, but your business comes from you actually listening to people and you
Yes.
listen. And this, when you started telling me about this, it's absolutely genius. Um, and it's genius because your heart is in it, not because you're you created this almost this scheme or this way to be able to get people to do business with you. No, you're just Paul, and then the business just flows. Can you explain that flow too?
So one of the blessings I've always had is the gift of building relationships and building trust early. And so when I came on with Hero, I decided that I really didn't want to do 500 cold calls a week. And so I started a different type of networking where it's introductions and you're meeting people and you're getting introductions. But I came up with, and this is where the ADHD comes in. I was sitting there one night in bed. I was like, you know what? I need to do a show. And so I called one of my buddies who's a producer the next day. I said, hear me out here. You're going to think I'm crazy, but I want to do a show and I want to spotlight facility managers. And he was like, okay, I like where you're going. Tell me more. I said, I don't know if it's a podcast. I don't know if it's LinkedIn Live. I don't know what it is. That's where I'm going to trust you on. And he said, Paul, he goes, the way you are, do it live. I said, okay. So I started LinkedIn Live, and Scott, who we gave a shout out to, for earlier was my first guest. And I truly attribute God and his blessings on me. He's given me two of the greatest guests on my first two shows. I'm booked out for the whole year.
Wow.
And it's I want to shine the spotlight on them. And I think you hit on something that people can feel.
Mhm.
There's a genuineness and an authenticity to people when you're around them. And I know that right now, clarity and authenticity is one of the big words you hear a lot, but authenticity can be faked. But I'm Paul, and I tell people I'm as broken as they come.
Yeah.
And that's where my freedom is. When I admitted that I'm broken and not perfect, I became free. And I had a peace come over me like never before. And so I try to translate that into my work and how I deal with my partners.
Paul, do you find that this is just an observation? Do you find that when a person is speaking about authenticity a lot, is focused on it, most of the time it's absent?
I would agree with that. And I told somebody something today. I said, tell your story because your story is the only one, you're the only person that can tell yours. And too many people are trying to tell other stories. I call it the Facebook world we lived in, where people would post stuff and they'd post these beautiful family pictures, great Christmas, great holidays. And then 2 days later, they're getting separated, they're getting divorced. And I, you know, I just don't believe in that. I had a rough first marriage and I've always been open and honest with it. One of the things about ADHD is I journal a lot.
Yeah.
I write a lot because, we're all creative. And so I found out when I got out of that marriage, I had a lot of baggage that I was carrying with me. And so when I left that marriage with $76 to my name and I stayed in a hotel that night. And it was not the Hyatt or the Hilton. I promise you that.
Did you drive up to
But
the door?
no, no, no. But I had to make sure that I took my clothes inside because I was scared I was going to get broken into.
But
I'll put it that way.
but there was a hallway in the hotel.
No, you had to walk out. You had to walk out. It was outside.
I just asked you
One
if
of
you
the.
drove up to the hotel door.
Uh,
That's a motel,
well,
Paul.
no, it was a second. It was a second story. How am I going to drive up to the second
But were
story?
you parked in front of the door, Paul?
The downstairs one, yes. So
Okay, so
you are correct.
okay, so I think that this is what happened with the yielding right here is exactly this, Paul. Because you told me the story and then I asked the question and you didn't tell me the whole story, buddy. I think that the
Kelly,
yielding, I think this is where the yielding challenge is, man.
embrace the race, buddy. Just embrace it. Embrace it. So,
I guess I
so
have to. If I want the things to change, I got to change the way I look at them. That's
like,
what I've got to do there. I've got to change the
ex-
way I was looking at driving up to the hotel.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, but you were,
And see,
for the record,
yes,
you were parked
you
in
were
front
right.
of the door
You were right.
on the
Yes,
second
you were
floor.
correct.
Okay,
Yes, you
all
were
right.
correct.
I wasn't looking to be correct. I just wanted to get the record straight there, Paul. So so how much of your $76 did you spend on this hotel that you didn't drive up to the door?
Probably 59 plus tax.
So you were down to probably 15 bucks.
Hmm.
What are you
Hmm.
thinking at that time? You got 15 bucks to your name. What are you thinking? Do you go into like Rocky mode? Like I'm gonna defeat Drago in Rocky 4, and I'm gonna go out in the wilderness with no workout stuff, and I'm going, or are you like, man, this sucks?
I went one better than that. I got on my knees and
Mm,
told God I want to be that 5-year-old boy that believes Jesus can do anything again.
wow.
So that next day, I went into work and I'm looking at apartments. I'm looking at everything. They want down deposits, and I'm like, I can't come up with that. She had already wiped out our joint account, and so I ended up finding a site called roomies.com, and I'm looking at rooms for rent. And I reached out to one guy and I just told him, I said, I sent an email, and I still call him one of my angels because I reached out to him, told him the whole story. And I told him I don't have the deposit. I'll have to pay, in weeks to get caught up. And he said, come get the key. And I said, I don't believe you read the email above. He goes, I didn't ask anything about the email above. He goes, I said, come get the key. So I end up going to his house and he hands me the key. He says, you're not paying. This was September 19th, September 20th. He said, you're not paying rent till the beginning of next year. So it turns out he has this 2-story, 4,000 square foot house, and he only offices there during the day sometimes. So I had this house to myself. And so right then and there, I knew that God was moving in my life. And so I started going back to church, being a member of a church. And when I started doing that, I met an old man I call Pops. He walked up to me and he can't hear with a lick, but he walked up to me and he said, what's your name? And the non-denominational now, it's like a rock concert usually before they start. Uh, but I said, Paul McCarthy. And he strummed an imaginary guitar. And I said, yeah, the Beatle, almost. I don't have the money and I can't sing. And so he ended up talking to me for a couple weeks. And for some reason, God put it on my heart to ask him to go to breakfast. And so we went to breakfast in January of 20, right before COVID. And we sat there for 4 hours and talked like men don't talk anymore. We talked about every weakness we have, every brokenness we have. We cried, we laughed. And this is a guy that doesn't know me from Adam, but we had that bond. And so what we figured out was men needed this. They needed something like this. And so COVID hits, everything shuts down. We were doing a Bible study online in Zoom. There was about 7 of us, I guess there was. And so we told them, we said, as soon as we open up, we're inviting y'all down. Y'all can come have breakfast with us Saturday, 7 a.m. We'll just have a men's group. It's not a Bible study, but we'll just hang out and be men.
Yeah.
And so we started that. And every week I would end it by asking the men, say, you don't have to answer this, but where are you spiritually, physically, and mentally right now? And Kelly, to the man, I think every one of them would at least cry once because we carry this burden. We're told to wipe it off, you'll be okay. But the reality of it is we do need to be vulnerable. We need to share, and we need other men to understand it. And so from that group, I'm proud to say that once I moved, Pops is still running it,
Uh-huh.
and they still meet every Saturday. And you can look at my Facebook. He still tags me every Saturday, and we call it the Lord's Breakfast Club. And it was a special thing to me. It was part of me thanking God for being there for me. And during that time, I started writing daily devotionals.
Yeah.
And so it started out with just our men's group. I would send them, and I told them, I'm not writing this for you. I'm writing it for me because I'm the one that's broken. It just so happens that everybody else can relate to it. So word of mouth got around, and I did it for 2 years. And when I stopped doing it, I was at 120 people I was sending it to daily, and that was text, copy, and it would take about 45 minutes. But it was a healing period for me from my prior marriage. And looking back now, I realize that, but in the moment, I was just doing what God called me to do.
So help me with this because this is where a lot of people have challenges. Especially like my family grew up in the Catholic Church, right? Well, not much in the Catholic Church. It was just better to be, say that you were Catholic and not practice than to
Yeah.
do something else. And
Yeah.
also, the other side of my family was the LDS side. So again, it was better for them to just say they were because they grew up in Utah. It's better to say, "Hey, we are LDS," but it's a term called Jack Mormon. There's not really a term in the Catholic Church for that, but I always saw it as, I didn't really go to Catholic church, any of those things. But I remember when we went to non-denominational, and you alluded to it just a second ago, when you were talking about you go in as like a rock concert. How different was that for you? The adjustment to go from a very traditional singing hymns, stand up, sit down, fight, 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 and then go into a scenario where you're like, this is a lot. Like this is a strong thing. What was your how were you able to take that?
So the way I looked at it was this was a season God had put me in.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, during this time, I'm still talking to Marcy, and she's still a devout Catholic. And she never once said, "Are you coming to the Catholic Church? Are you doing?" She never once said that.
Yeah.
So I went through this period, and I I heard a sermon that I think was the whole reason I was there, because it stuck with me, is that the average human being has 30 to 50,000 unspoken thoughts go through their mind daily. And those sound like 80% of them sound like, Kelly, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Kelly, you're not worthy. And they're negative. So what he said was, why don't you go ahead and do a spiritual rehab? And every time a negative thought comes to your mind, find a verse, find something. And I compare it to a smoker trying to quit. Is it's that 7 seconds that you have where you want that cigarette, but if you can bypass that, you're good. So
Mm.
my saying was, the Lord is my shepherd. And Kelly, I'll tell you, for the first 2 weeks, if any of the kids can understand, a broken record. I sounded like it. It was just constant repeat. But two things happened after the 30 days. One, I got my negative thoughts down to about 30%.
Uh-huh.
The second thing that I never thought about was I became so much closer to God because I was talking to Him so much. And so I still do once a quarter, I do a spiritual rehab, and I'll do it for 30 days. And I just try to keep my thoughts clear. And I think that's part of my mentality and how I keep a positive outlook on life, is because 90% of why we don't do stuff is up here. It's not because we can't do it, right?
Yeah.
So, so leaving the non-denominational church is actually kind of a funny story, because I woke up one morning and Marcy and I would text. We're long distance, and I said, "I'm going to St. Anne's,"
Uh-huh.
and she said, "St. Anne's? That's the Catholic church up the street, right?"
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You're going to the Catholic church?" I said,
Uh-oh.
"Yeah." So I walked into St. Anne's, and people have said this before, and I never really understood it, but I was home again.
There we go.
This was who I was. And I walked in, and the first time I put my fingers in the holy water and made the sign of the cross, I knew God brought me back through everything in my life to come back to the Catholic Church, and to be able to share his testimony and my testimony, his witness, and just disciple to others.
So when this has always been an interesting thing, and I can actually I'm gonna while we're here, excuse me, um, I'm actually gonna Google this because I've heard the part. I don't know how many it is. So it's the thoughts, right? So these thoughts. So what is it, like 70,000 thoughts a day or whatever? And it's
Yeah.
ants, right? Automatic negative thoughts. Ants is what
Yep.
they call them. I've heard this over again, like 70,000. I'm gonna do it in. So 70,000. 1, 2, 3 uh, thoughts a day research. The reason why is because I would have loved to be in this research. How did they count them? Did they have a guy with a clicker saying, "What did you have a thought? Did you think about it?" Or did they hook them up to something? An idea. So here it is. The idea that humans have around 70 thoughts per day is a popular, sometimes inaccurate statistic Research suggests that while we do significant number of thoughts, the exact figure varies to a large percentage and may be repetitive. So I'm just wondering, like, how and I tell you, like, we talk about rabbit holes, right? How I'm going to click on this article to see where it takes me because we're going down this rabbit hole. And I've wondered this for a long time. I think that you and I, Paul, probably have more than the normal person of thoughts per day. Would you say?
Yes, I would agree.
Okay, let's see. Fact check. Oh, here it is. Fact checking 60,000 thoughts, the mystery behind it. So let's go to this. According to research, oh, here it is. Dr. Fred Lunkston of Stanford University, a human being has approximately 60,000 thoughts per day, and 90% of them are repetitive, like you were saying, right?
Uh-huh.
95 or 90%. Wow, that's a lot of mental noise. As we look closer, let's see here, blah, 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 step by step. But they don't ever tell you how they actually did the research. So here it is. In 2005, National Science Foundation published an article summarizing the research on human thoughts per day. It found that an average person has 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. So there's maybe something to something around some kind of 2,000 paper. Third step, let's look for the paper. Is this interesting to you at all?
It's a rabbit hole. Yes, it
Yes,
is.
it is. Okay, so it's never heard of the Lunskin number. Let's see here. It's the Newman paper, is a similar and more recent. They asked 29 study participants with a GAD to track their worries for 10 days and the outcomes of these worries for 30 days.
Okay, Kelly, you and I could not count how many thoughts we have.
That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, and I'm not saying that we don't be inspired by these things, but it's amazing because, like, it's amazing how God works, right? So he'll use something, right, that sparks like a message that you heard, and he'll spark it. But isn't it amazing because he doesn't want us to get so focused on the research paper because we could spend a couple days on this and
Hmm.
figure out and be like, you know what, Paul, it actually wasn't 70,000. It was
Yeah,
like 20,000. Actually, it
yeah.
probably wasn't 20,000. It was like a lot. Like that's what, because they had, I think they had 29 people do the study and they marked down for themselves. Could you for 10 days even stay focused enough to write down the thoughts that you were having?
No,
I would be like,
no.
for the first, I don't know about you, but for the first day, I would be like, I'm writing them down, Paul. Second day, I would be like, how many did I have from 12 to 2 yesterday? Let me multiply that by 12. You know what I'm saying?
See, I would be the guy that looks like the ticket taker at high school football games with my clicker. I'd be clicking every time because I could not write it down. There is no way. I
Oh,
jokingly, you, you understand ADHD and the rabbit holes and the way the mind thinks. I jokingly tell Marcy, please, if I ever die, delete my search history because I will Google stuff. I mean, right now, my chat GPT is named Little Mac. My grandpa name is Big Mac. And so Little Mac is my chat GPT. And people laugh at me because they're like, every time somebody asks a question, Paul's talking to Little Mac. And he's my little journal. I mean, he literally is a journal for me.
so do me the favor. Let's look at this. Let's stay in the rabbit hole for one more second. Um, let's go to. I didn't do that. I didn't do chat. So let me go to my chat and I'm gonna ask. Um, let me see. I'll just put 70,000 thoughts a day. 70 or thoughts a day. I type really fast too. By the way, you can tell that.
I, I could tell. I think the chicken was calling, asking for a paperback.
Okay, so 95% it's going through. So 95% of them are repetitive. So I think the thing, and 80% it says are negative. That's where
Yeah.
try this 3 times a day. What's one thought that I could plant today? So when it's talking about it, the cool thing is, the 80% are negative, 95% are repetitive. So to be able to get those thoughts to be repetitive, but I would love, this would, what I would love to be able to call it out and be like, you know, do you really have 70,000? I don't believe it. I don't believe that they have 70,000. They have somewhere around there. And then if you could get it repetitive, how do you get your thoughts to your repetitive thoughts? When you say that you go through like a spiritual, what do you call
Spiritual
it?
rehab.
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 When you do, what do you do?
Anytime say for example, I'm about to do something and that little angel or devil on my shoulder says you can't do that, I will say the Lord is my shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, and that pushes me through.
Okay. What other things kind of, do you go to, like, say your happy place? I remember saying this to someone early on where they were struggling with confidence in their business. And I said, well, most likely you're struggling with your confidence because your competence isn't high, right? So if
Mhm.
you gain competence, then you gain confidence, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, how can I gain competence when I'm not that experienced in what I'm doing? So I said, well, early on in my career, when I was in the professional beauty industry and I didn't know much, I would go mentally to bowling because bowling, I knew I could beat the person in my chair. There was very
Okay.
seldom a time that a person sat down in my chair, with the exception of one or two, that would beat me in bowling. And so I would gravitate towards, in my head, knew that I was going to jack up their haircut, but I could beat them in bowling. So my confidence came from bowling and then it kind of carried me through. Where do you go? Like when you're struggling and your confidence isn't high in the spiritual part, where do you go to be able to get that confidence back?
I don't necessarily have one place I go.
Yeah.
I go to the challenges that I've overcome.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people when I first got in adoption groups on Facebook, unfortunately, about 80% of adoptees have a victim mentality, and that's not a real stat. That's my observance.
You may hold
And
on.
and
Just for the record, I love this. You could say Daniel Tosh did this one time. He said, according to a study that I just made up, 3 out of 4 people choose blank, blank, blank. This is the greatest.
yeah,
I mean, that's the greatest lead in. But I love that, Paul.
yes,
So you
but
just made up a
I
study. What would be the percentage? What's the percentage of people then in your study that you just made up right now?
it would probably be about 88 out of 10, so 80%
Okay, so eight.
are
Let's go
they're
an off number
victims.
though. Go an off number, like 82%.
Okay, 73
Okay, 73% of what?
of adoptees have a victim mentality,
Mm.
and victim may be a little rough, but here's some of the quotes I heard was, well, people told me I was chosen. I'm not something on a grocery store shelf. And they would say things like, oh, well, you they say they did it for your betterment, but my family was horrible. Well, to me, here's my two arguments to that. When I started off, what I tell you, I had two moms that loved me, one that gave me birth and one that raised me. So my thought on chosen off a shelf, yeah, I was special because I was able to be chosen off that shelf. There are a lot of kids today that aren't able to be chosen off that shelf, and even kids that were born that are still in the foster system. So always look towards the positive. The second part about, well, you say it was for the betterment, but my family wasn't any good. How do we know that God didn't put you in that family to make a difference?
How do people respond in that? Because I think when they're in a place of pain, a lot of times when you because you're what I love about you, Paul, is you bring sunlight, but you don't bring sunlight from a side of like my life has always been sunlight, so like you need to look on the brighter side. You're someone who's in it with the people and says, I'm in it. I'm going through the same things, but there's a different way. how do you when you have a conversation with a person who just wants to stay in that place or doesn't know anything else, how do you get that love across to them?
I think it goes back to that instant trust that's built when I start talking. There's some type of trust that people feel. So, for example, I have a person that I'm working with right now that has some mental illness, and I say working with, I'm not working with. I'm being there for him, and I know it very well because of my first marriage, and I understand it, and I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy, but what I always lead with people who are in places, I always say, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm not pushing anything on you, but I'm going to tell you something. Have you tried God? And I just sit there, and a lot of times I hear, well, no, but I mean, I said, hold on, you're at your lowest low right now. You can't get any lower, right? You just told me that, and they say, yeah. Said, why not try God? Because when I was at my lowest lows, that's who I had to try. And he, everything that happened to me through my life, God planned. God knew what was going to happen. He knew he was going to put me through hell and back with my brother. He knew he was going to put me through hell and back with Jake. But he knew in the end, I was going to be a faithful disciple and share his word to change the world.
What about the age old one? And I love this when you have a conversation with someone and they're like, "Well, then why does good things happen to bad people?"
Because God doesn't want bad things to happen to you, but the fact of the matter, this is life, and bad things do happen. It's how you respond to the challenges. And I was, and here's a perfect example. A 21-year-old hero of mine was killed in a motorcycle wreck. How did I respond to it? I responded to it with a death wish. I decided to drink, decided to have drugs, decided to do everything I could because I wasn't going to live to be 21. And then, oh, you know what? I just turned 21. What do I do now? My plan's broken. And so I have to find faith and I have to have that inner spirit, the Holy Spirit inside me to keep me going daily. And that's what I try to empower people with because it can change your life. I had the biggest compliment from one of my birth sisters, and she didn't even think it was a compliment. She goes, and this was right when I started going back to church. When I said I was going to be that 5-year-old boy, she goes, "Oh man, you're a Jesus freak now." And I said, "I sure am."
Well, tell me this, Paul, too, because when I say successful, for me, it's I always preface this because my brother got on me. I got a big brother who's my hero and my best friend in the world, Rob. And I said successful. He stopped me one day and he's like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" He said, "If you're talking about money, then stop talking." And when I say that you're wildly successful at what you do, it doesn't just have to do with you closing deals or doing the things. It's the fact that you have such a positive impact and light on this world. There's a lot of people who will say, and I've run up against this when I started Inchstones, right? So when I started the show Inchstones on the podcast, I had so many people say, "You better be careful. That's going to kill your business."
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on those things? Because you've seen the exact opposite happen and you've been able to navigate different areas and where two things that aren't taboo, but when they come together, they are, meaning a relationship with God and business. These two, generally, people say it's taboo. I want to stay away from it. Yet, twice a year, every one of them posts on their Instagram or their LinkedIn or their Facebook. He has risen. It is so great to be a part.
Yeah. Yeah. So it, touching on that, here's what I always tell people is I have two choices in life. I can either leave my boys millions of dollars or I can leave them a legacy that will live forever because the
Mm.
millions won't last forever. And so my legacy that I want to leave them, and my youngest has my heart. He's my gentle. Jake has my heart too. He just hasn't found it. But my youngest, he's my gentle giant. He's going to be 17 in November. He's 6'3", 240, size 14 shoe, but he would not hurt a soul. And I watch him and how he interacts with others. He's got that in him because he saw his father doing it. And that's, to me, I always tell people that I've heard it, that if you look at God like you look at your earthly father, there can be some kind of symbolism in that. If you had a bad dad, you're probably not going to think God is a good father. And Madden and Jake, I'm not perfect. I'm the first one to throw myself on the mat and say I'm broken. But even during my brokenness, I was able to give sunlight.
Do you still have dad strength over your baby that's 6'3", 240?
You know, the funny thing about it is there comes that day. There always comes that day. And
Has he tested it?
he he tested it one time. I
Oh,
said, "You and I can go outside." I said, "I may be old, I may be slow, but I'm a lot smarter than you are."
oh man,
And
that
he backed down.
yeah, that dad strength is something. I haven't developed it yet. I don't think my kids are old enough. Um, but my dad, like, because I got taller than my dad at a not, I mean, a pretty early age. I would say in high school I was taller than my dad. I mean, I, but I remember we were wrestling around or whatever it is. My dad wasn't a big dude. He was probably 5'6", maybe 5'5", 5'6", somewhere around there. And we were wrestling around, and he stood back up. I remember we were in a double wide mobile home on the side of the freeway. That's where we lived growing up in Gaviota, California. We're wrestling around or whatever, and I remember getting him a little bit, like getting the best position. And he stood back up on his knees, and he was a boxer, and he reared back, pow, hit me dead in my chest. And when I did, he just looked at me like to say, "That's it. That's what's coming." And I was like,
Yep.
from that time, I was like, I don't give it. Where do you think dad's strength comes from? Do you think it comes from the Lord? Do you think that God imparts dad strength in you because he knows your kids are going to test you at some point?
I think it is. I think it truly is a test. I mean, because here's the thing. We all fight God at times.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you hear that little tap, or you feel that little tap on your shoulder, or you hear that little voice in your head that God's telling you to do something, and you're sitting there and you're like, no, no, God, no, I'm not listening this time. But he keeps on doing it. And eventually we have to understand we listen to him. So when our sons get that little syndrome where they think, oh, I can whoop my dad, and I try to explain it to Marcy because Marcy doesn't understand it. Women don't understand it, for the most part. They think, oh, leave him alone. He's still a baby. But it is a rite of passage, and it's something that sets the tone for, listen, a father is a father through thick and thin, through good and bad, and he's always going to be stronger than you. Now, that comes from wisdom.
Yeah.
That can come in many different shapes, but it's just like with God. He's stronger than us. He's our strength.
Don't you think it would be great though, Paul, if like, because I see all these different workout plans, right? Like, if you want to get a six pack after 50, you do these chair exercises and you get this app and they do the thing. Imagine if they had an app or a workout plan for dad strength. Like, can you imagine? Like, I don't even know what type of exercises you would do because dad strength doesn't come from like your arms being big or your chest being big. I'm saying like, and there's big brother strength too. Like my brother is smaller than me, but my brother will whoop my tail. Like there's something about it. I just wish, and maybe we could come up with that. We could come up with the training program to not yield when people are emerging into traffic, and dad strength put it together, which I think would be amazing.
I, I agree. I agree. And I'm going to casually slip by that first part that you slipped in there so nicely. Now that you've reminded Marcy 14 times about this,
I want to find, you know what I'm going to do, Paul? I'm going to put it out because we got a little bit of an audience. I'm going to put it out. If you were that guy in Florida that someone did not yield in a Acura, what color was the Acura?
black,
It was a black Acura, and you were merging on. Do you remember kind of where it was, Paul?
it was going over the O'Galley Bridge to Beachside
Okay,
from
so
Melbourne.
oh, yeah, because well, we used to live in Melbourne. So if you are that person and you got not merged, I want you on the podcast. I'm going to find you. I'm going to bring you back together with Paul because that's the way that God works. And we're going to have Winnie. We're going to have Marcee on the show too. And we're going to see if you truly were in the right or the wrong, Mr. Yield Man. You're out there in Florida. We absolutely love you. Paul, I know your time is obviously super crazy valuable. How couple last questions for you is how much of an unfair advantage do you think that you have because you have a Texas accent?
I think that since Texas is its own country, uh, we do have unfair advantages. I mean, I'm stuck down here in God's waiting room in Florida, and I've got all these Eastern accents. I love all my Eastern friends, but I just we have a blessed accent. If Jesus came back right now, he'd be a Texan. Not a
It,
Dallas Cowboy fan. Not a Dallas Cowboy fan. I know where you're about to go.
I think he definitely. I mean, because Houston, I'm a Houston Oilers fan. I believe that Houston Oilers fans, I don't think there's different levels of heaven, but I think that there might be like a little bit earlier ascension for the original Houston Oilers fans. I believe.
Well, for all the younger kids, ask your Chat GPT what a Houston Oiler was, and it will tell you, and it will age both Kelly and I.
Oh, Paul, you're incredible, man. I started the podcast because of my two kids, right? And what's funny about it is when I first started it, I was like, I just want to interview most iconic people in the world, like yourself. I want them to give advice to my kids by name. But then we developed a show called Inch Stones, which is 15 minutes of wisdom that you can walk with, take us on your walk in the morning, and you can tune in. And then there's one where Paul's going to have this happen to him where I go live and I call my friends randomly and they don't know they're on the podcast till they're on the podcast. And so obviously with this being me getting to interview one of the most iconic people in my world, and icon for me is not a a fame sense. It's a person who does the right thing for the right reason and the right things turn out, although it's not on their time, it's on God's time. And
Yeah,
Paul, that's what you represent to me. Hearing
thank
your
you.
story, and I know we're just scratching the surface because we haven't found the guy that didn't merge. We haven't found him, so we haven't got the true, locked in story. But what advice? My daughter McKenna is 16 years old. My son Maddox is 13. She's into theater. He's into sports. Houston Oilers and Titans fan, by the way. What advice would you have for Maddox and McKenna? And if you could call yourself Uncle Paul, it would be awesome.
Okay. Maddox, McKenna, just remember there's only one you, and be yourself. Be original. Don't worry what the world says because that's all just noise. And your Uncle Paul loves you.
Paul, I was going to end with that one, but I think that I would love to ask this question if you're okay with it.
Yeah,
You see how I don't tell you the question, but I asked you if I
go
can.
ahead.
Okay. As you look into the camera towards me, if this image was Jake and you had 30 seconds or a minute with him, what would you say?
It doesn't matter what happens. Your dad will always be there, and I'll always love you. And I miss you,
Paul, you're incredible, man. It's
brother.
it's
Thank you.
amazing. It's amazing to see that um, you've been through the fire, man. Like, and in some senses in your life, you're still in that fire. But
Yeah.
to be able to give so much hope to so many people, I just think is an unbelievable thing. And I can't. I mean, I'm going to force you. I told you I was going to force you to be my friend for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate you, and be blessed, my brother.
Well, and I want to tell anyone who's listening, I want to tell you the power of friendships and of connection points, because this was probably five or 6 years ago. I spoke for a conference, Sport Clips. It was about 3,500 people. In that audience happened to be a guy named Scott. Scott reached out to me after he left that company and said he started with another company, and he then told me about a friend named Paul. So here, 5 years before, I'm at a conference, 3,500 people. I can't even see all the people that I'm speaking to. And Scott and I didn't spend that much time together. But then Scott reaches out, and Scott has a friend named Paul. And now I have a friend named Paul that literally has inspired me to no end. You never know where someone's at. You never know where they're from. You never know where they're going. And you never know where you'll meet up with them again. Make a friend out of everybody. That's what my pops used to say. Paul, you're incredible, man. Stick around for a second. If you got a second, stick around. We're going to run a
Yeah.
commercial and then we'll roll. Sound good? All
All
right,
right.
brother.
Yeah,
You're
sounds good.
officially off the hot seat. Peace, love, and soul.
Nothing more on my mind. I got two shines, so every day I climb. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised.